Here is a number that stopped me for a second. If I take out a 30-year mortgage today, in the first 12 months, more than 80% of every payment I make will not buy me a single square foot of my own house. It will go straight to the bank as interest. I did not know that until I actually sat down and built the amortization schedule myself. And once I saw it, I could not stop wondering what people actually mean when they say renting is throwing money away. So I decided to find out. Not with an opinion and not with something I heard on a podcast, but with an actual spreadsheet. I wanted to know what happens if I take a normal income, a normal amount of savings, and run both paths side by side for 20 years. Buy a home in one column, rent the same kind of home and invest the difference in the other. Then let time do what time does, and see which number actually wins. Before I get into the math, I want to be honest about where I started. I assumed buying would win, eventually, as long as I stayed put long enough. That was the belief I walked in with. It is the belief most people walk in with. Owning feels like progress. Renting feels like standing still. I wanted to test whether that feeling was actually true or whether it was just a story I had absorbed without checking it. Here is the setup I used. A household earning enough to comfortably save $84,000. A home priced at $420,000. Which is close to the national median depending on where you live. A comparable rental nearby going for $2,400 a month. That is not a random number. Divide the home price by the annual rent, $420,000 divided by $28,800, and you get a price-to-rent ratio of about 14.6. Anything under 15 tends to favor buying, over 20 tends to favor renting, and I picked a number right in the zone where the decision is genuinely close. I did not want to rig the comparison in either direction. The down payment is 20%, $84,000, leaving a mortgage of $336,000. I used a fixed rate of 6.75%, which is roughly where rates have been sitting recently, though I want to be clear that this is an assumption for the illustration, not a prediction of where rates will be when you are watching this. Nobody knows that. Before I even get the keys, there are closing costs. Lender fees, title insurance, inspection, prepaid taxes, and a stack of paperwork nobody actually reads in full. Closing costs typically run somewhere between 2 and 5% of the purchase price. I used 3%, which comes out to $12,600. So before I have moved a single box, I have already spent $96,600 just to own the right to start paying a mortgage. That is more than the entire $84,000 down payment. Nobody mentions that part when they say buying builds wealth. Now for the monthly numbers. Principal and interest on that mortgage comes out to about $2,180. Add property taxes, which I estimated at 1.1% of the home value annually, that is roughly $385 a month. Add homeowner's insurance around $140 a month, and I set aside 1% of the home value per year for maintenance, which works out to $350 a month, because a house does not stay a house without money going into it constantly. Total monthly cost of ownership before any surprises comes to about $3,055. The comparable rental is $2,400 a month. No property taxes. No insurance bill with my name on it. No maintenance fund. If a pipe bursts at 2 a.m, that is a phone call to a landlord, not a $5,000 invoice with my name on it. That leaves $655 a month that never leaves my pocket if I rent instead of buy. This is usually the point where someone says, sure, but rent is 100% gone, while at least some of that mortgage payment is building equity. Technically true. But I wanted to know how much, so I actually looked at the amortization table instead of assuming. In month 1, out of that $2,180 payment, $1,890 is interest. Only about $290 actually reduces the loan balance. So out of my full $3,055 monthly housing cost, roughly $290 builds equity. The other $2,765 is the cost of having a place to live. No different in spirit from rent, it is just labeled differently on the statement. That was the first real surprise for me. I had always pictured a mortgage as half rent, half savings account. In year 1, it is closer to 95% rent and 5% savings account. The equity story is real, but it takes years to actually show up. and I wanted to see exactly when. So here is what I did next. I took the $84,000 that would have gone into the down payment and closing costs, and instead put it into a diversified stock index fund, assuming a long-run average annual return of 8%. I want to flag that clearly, 8% is a historical long-term average for a broad stock portfolio, not a guarantee. And any real portfolio will have years that are up 30% and years that are down 20%. I am using it as a planning assumption, nothing more. Then, every month, I invested the $655 difference between renting and owning, and I let rent itself climb 3% a year, which is a reasonable long-run assumption, even though in the real world it moves in uneven jumps rather than a smooth curve. Fast forward 3 years. The owning path has paid down the loan to about $326,000. So around $10,000 of principal has actually been paid off. Assume the home appreciates somewhere between 3 and 4% a year, again an assumption, not a promise, and the house is now worth somewhere between $458,000 and $472,000. Subtract the remaining loan, and home equity lands somewhere around $132,000 to $146,000. On the renting side, that original $84,000, compounding at 8% for 3 years, has grown to roughly $105,000 on its own. Add 3 years of monthly contributions. Starting at $655 and shrinking slightly as rent rises, and the total portfolio comes out to somewhere around $145,000. So after 3 years, the two paths are close enough that neither one has a decisive lead. That surprised me. I expected buying to look far worse this early, given how front-loaded the closing costs and interest are. Instead, the race was closer than the popular narrative suggests, in either direction. The story starts to separate once I pushed out to year 10. On the ownership side, the mortgage balance has fallen to around $286,000. Using the same appreciation range, the home is worth somewhere between $564,000 and $621,000. Leaving equity of roughly $278,000 to $335,000. That principal and interest payment has not moved a cent in 10 years, still $2,180, while everything else in the economy has gotten more expensive around it. On the renting side, the original investment has grown to roughly $181,000 by itself. Add a decade of monthly contributions and their own growth, and the total portfolio lands somewhere around $340,000. But here is the detail that changed how I thought about this. Rent, after 10 years of 3% annual increases, is no longer $2,400. It is approaching $3,220 a month. The gap that once handed the renter $655 extra every month has shrunk to something closer to $100, and it keeps shrinking from there. Meanwhile, the owner's core housing payment has not budged. By year 20, the picture is genuinely striking. The home, still using that same conservative appreciation range, is worth somewhere between $758,000 and $852,000. The mortgage balance has dropped to roughly $185,000, leaving equity of about $573,000 to $667,000. The invested portfolio, meanwhile, has grown to somewhere around $680,000, counting both the original lump sum and 2 decades of monthly contributions. On paper, the two paths are close again. Close enough that small changes in assumptions about returns or appreciation could tip it either direction. But the two piles of money are not the same kind of wealth, and that is where I think most comparisons like this one go wrong by only looking at the final number. The invested portfolio can be sold in pieces on a Tuesday afternoon with a few clicks. The home equity cannot. Selling even $10,000 of it means either refinancing, borrowing against it, or selling the entire house, dealing with a realtor, staging, inspection contingencies, and another round of closing costs on the way out. Home equity is real wealth, but it is wealth with a lock on it. There is also a discipline problem hiding underneath all of this, one that no spreadsheet can capture. The entire renting scenario depends on actually investing that monthly difference every single month for 20 years, including the months when the market is down 30% and every financial headline is predicting the end of the world. In practice, a lot of that difference quietly turns into a nicer car, a few extra vacations, or just a slightly more comfortable lifestyle. And the portfolio that looked so good in year 1 never actually reaches year 20 intact. A mortgage does not offer that choice. The payment is due whether you feel disciplined that month or not, and that forced structure is worth something, even though it never shows up as a line item. Buying also comes with risks that are easy to skip past. There is concentration risk, since almost all of that wealth sits in one single asset, in one neighborhood, in one local economy. If that area struggles, there is no rebalancing your way out of it. There is mobility risk, because a job offer in another city is a simple decision for a renter and a complicated one for an owner, who now has to weigh selling, renting the place out from a distance, or eating 2 housing payments at once. And there is timing risk. Sell that home after 3 or 4 years instead of 20, and the closing costs going in, the selling costs going out, and the interest-heavy early payments can erase most or all of the advantage buying is supposed to offer. So where does that leave the actual decision? I think it comes down to 2 honest questions, and neither one is really about spreadsheets. How long do I plan to actually stay? Buying tends to need somewhere around 7 to 10 years to absorb its upfront costs and start pulling ahead through fixed payments and rising rent elsewhere. Leave sooner than that, and the math rarely forgives it. And second, if I choose to rent, will I genuinely invest the difference? Consistently, for years, including the uncomfortable years. Because the entire advantage on that side of the comparison depends on an answer of yes, not a plan to eventually get around to it. Neither path is automatically the smart one, and neither is automatically the mistake. Owning trades flexibility and liquidity for stability, a fixed payment, and forced long-term savings. Renting trades that stability for flexibility, liquidity, and a chance at stronger growth, provided the discipline actually holds. What decided it for me was not which column had the bigger number after 20 years. It was being honest about which trade-offs I could actually live with, and which one I would actually follow through on. Because on paper, both paths can work, and in practice, only one of them fits how a person actually behaves. If you want to run this for your own numbers, plug in your local home price, your local rent, and an interest rate you can actually get quoted. Because the answer changes more than people expect once you swap in your own city instead of a national average. Let me know in the comments which side of this your own numbers land on, and if this kind of breakdown is useful, there is more of it coming.